I was 25 then, a student in a quiet little village college that sat at the edge of the fields. My days were simple. Morning classes, the chatter of friends under the banyan tree, and the long walk home through narrow dirt paths lined with wheat and mustard plants. Life didn't rush here. It moved like the slow wind that carried the smell of earth and grass. People in our village knew each other by name and by story. The grocer still called me the professor's boy, though my father wasn't a professor at all. He had just once said I should study hard and make something of myself. Maybe that's why I clung to my book so tightly, as if each page could carry me somewhere beyond the horizon of those endless green fields. Every morning began with the same rhythm. I'd wake before sunrise, the roosters still half asleep, and listen to the muezzin's voice travel softly through the fog. My mother would already be in the courtyard boiling tea on the clay stove. She'd hand me a cup with a quiet smile, the kind that didn't need words. My younger siblings would still be curled under their thin quilts, dreaming of things I never had the chance to dream. The college itself was small, just 3 blocks of old bricks and tin roofs that groaned under the summer heat. The classrooms smelled faintly of chalk and dust, and the benches had carved initials of students who'd long moved on. Still, there was something comforting about that place. It was imperfect, but it was mine. I wasn't brilliant, but I was determined. Every exam felt like a step closer to something bigger. A job in the city, perhaps, or at least the pride in my father's eyes when I brought home a degree. Most days, that was enough to keep me going. The village had its own quiet magic. Children ran barefoot through the lanes, chasing kites made of old newspaper. Women gathered by the well, their laughter echoing as they filled silver pots. Evenings were softer, sunlight melting into orange, smoke rising from cooking fires, the world settling into stillness. I loved those moments most, when the day exhaled and peace hung low in the air. Yet even in such peace there was an ache, a sense that my world was both beautiful and small. I'd look at the horizon and wonder what lay beyond it. Cities, new people, new stories? I didn't know, but I dreamed of it anyway. That morning felt no different from the rest, though later I would think back and wonder if something in the air had been trying to warn me. The wind was dry, sharper than usual. The school bell rang too soon, and the crows gathered noisily on the fence as if restless for something unseen. But at the time, I noticed nothing. Routine makes you blind to omens. After class, I sat under the old neem tree with a few classmates. We talked about exams, joked about the strict headmaster, and shared roasted chickpeas from a paper cone. The sun was high by then, turning the air thick and lazy. I was thinking of going home early when our teacher, Sir Abbas, called my name from the veranda. "Go to the farmhouse nearby," he said, fanning himself with a piece of cardboard. "Bring some water for the staff room. The tap here isn't working again." It was a small task, something any student might be asked to do. I nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir," I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my trousers. He handed me a metal bucket, its handle slightly bent. "Be quick before the sun gets worse." As I walked down the path toward the farmhouse, the others laughed and teased me about being the college errand boy. I waved them off with a smile. It was just water, just another small errand in another ordinary day. The path stretched out ahead, golden and quiet. Birds hopped across the dry earth. Somewhere far off, a tractor hummed. I remember thinking about nothing in particular, just the sound of my footsteps and the shimmer of heat rising from the ground. I had no idea that within the next hour, everything I thought I knew about safety, trust, and peace would change forever. Back then, it was still just a normal afternoon. I was only a student with a bucket in my hand, walking toward a farmhouse that looked calm and still under the wide, blinding sky, and then, from the distance, I saw it, the old wooden gate slightly open and a man in uniform standing near it. The farmhouse guard. He saw me, smiled faintly, and waved. I didn't know that smile would be the last moment of innocence I'd ever have. "Come," he called. "You've come for water, haven't you?" I nodded, stepping closer, the metal bucket clanging softly against my leg, and that's where it all began. The road from the college to the farmhouse was no more than a narrow stretch of earth, baked dry by the sun. Every step stirred up a puff of dust that clung to my shoes and the edges of my trousers. The afternoon heat had grown fierce now, the kind that pressed down on you until each breath felt heavy. Cicadas droned from the trees, their chorus filling the silence between the distant calls of birds. I could feel sweat tracing lines down my back, yet there was a strange calm in it all, the sort of quiet that only a village afternoon could hold. The world around me seemed asleep. Fields stretched endlessly on both sides, golden and trembling in the sunlight. A pair of oxen stood under a tree, swishing their tails lazily. The air smelled faintly of hay and wet soil, mixed with something metallic from the bucket I carried. In moments like that, life felt simple, maybe too simple. You could almost believe the world was harmless, that everything you saw was everything that existed. As I walked, my mind drifted toward childhood. I remembered running barefoot through these same paths, racing with friends toward the river that cut across the village. Back then, even the grown men at the farms seemed like protectors. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone trusted everyone. I had grown up believing that kindness was a given, that respect was an unspoken rule between the young and the old. Maybe that's why I didn't think twice when my teacher asked me to come here. The farmhouse wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen it from a distance countless times. The broad roof, the faded blue paint peeling from the walls, the sound of hens clucking behind the wooden fence. It looked like any other place in the village. Ordinary, harmless, and still. As I neared the gate, I saw him. The guard. He was an older man, gray streaks in his beard, his uniform faded at the seams. He stood with a relaxed posture, one hand resting on the gate latch. When he spotted me, he smiled, the kind of easy smile older men give to younger ones. "You're from the college, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded, shifting the bucket in my hand. "Sir asked me to bring some water." He chuckled softly. "The pump's working fine. Come in, I'll fill it for you." I hesitated only for a moment before stepping through the gate. The yard inside was quiet. A few hens scratched the ground near the shed. There were clay pots lined neatly along a wall, their surfaces glistening with condensation. Somewhere inside the farmhouse, a ceiling fan squeaked rhythmically. The guard moved toward the hand pump near the back and began pumping water into the bucket. The handle creaked as it went up and down, and cold, clear water splashed against the metal. I wiped my forehead with the back of my sleeve, grateful for the shade of a nearby tree. "You study at the college?" he asked, glancing at me. "Yes," I said, "final year." "Good," he replied. "Education takes you places." I never studied much myself. His voice was calm, almost friendly. He didn't seem dangerous, just another village elder making conversation. He filled the bucket halfway and paused. "It's heavy," he said thoughtfully. "If you don't mind, can you give me a hand for a moment? I need to move a crate inside before it rains later." "You look strong enough." I glanced up at the sky. It was cloudless, blazing with light. There was no sign of rain. Still, his tone wasn't suspicious, only casual, almost grateful. I remember thinking, why not? It would take only a minute. Helping elders was something I'd done 100 times before. My father had always said that respect begins with service, and the habit had never left me. "Sure," I said, smiling politely. "Where is it?" He pointed toward the open farmhouse door. The interior was dim compared to the brightness outside. I could see the outline of a few wooden crates stacked near a wall. The air from inside smelled faintly of oil and stored grain. I bent to pick up the bucket, meaning to leave it near the door, but he said quickly, "No need, just leave it there." "Come, it'll only take a minute." Something in his voice had shifted. Not much, just a small drop of warmth, like a note slightly off-key. But I didn't think about it then. Maybe the heat was dulling my senses. Maybe my trust was too deep-rooted to notice the cracks. I followed him toward the doorway. My footsteps echoed faintly against the stone floor. The air grew cooler, heavier. Inside, the light dimmed further, and the noises of the outside world, the birds, the pump, the wind, faded behind me. All that remained was the sound of our footsteps and the creak of a distant fan. I paused for just a second, glancing around. The walls were lined with shelves, jars of grain, and a few old farming tools. Everything seemed ordinary, unthreatening, like any other farmhouse I'd seen before. He moved ahead of me, pointing toward a crate near the corner. "That one," he said. "Help me lift it." I stepped forward, adjusting my grip, and for a fleeting moment something felt wrong, something I couldn't name. The air felt thicker, my heart beat slower, like my body knew what my mind refused to see. Still, I crouched down, reaching for the crate, and then, when I looked up, his expression had changed. It wasn't the easy smile from before. His eyes were different now, harder, colder, and fixed on me in a way that made my chest tighten. My hand froze midair. The bucket outside shimmered in the sunlight. The air inside the farmhouse was utterly still, and before I could even make sense of it, before I could move or speak, everything changed. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the sound seemed louder than it should have been, sharp, final, and heavy with something I didn't understand. The air in the farmhouse, which had felt only a little still before, now felt suffocating. The smell of oil and grain turned thicker, almost sour. For a second, I thought it was my imagination, that the sudden darkness and silence were only tricks of the mind. But then, everything inside me went quiet, as if my body sensed danger before my thoughts could catch up. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the hum of the fan. I turned slightly, meaning to step back toward the door to say something polite to leave, but I couldn't find my voice. His eyes were still on me, unblinking, and something in them made my stomach twist. The room seemed smaller now, the shadows longer. There was no warmth left in his face, only a kind of cold certainty. For a heartbeat, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just standing too close. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was nothing. We are taught not to question elders, to assume respect where none is earned. So I stood there, frozen between confusion and courtesy, caught in a silence that pressed against my ribs. And then everything blurred. The sound of my own heartbeat, the weight of the air, his movements, it all mixed into something that didn't make sense. I wish I could tell you what happened next. But I can't, not because I don't remember, but because some memories are too heavy for words. They don't fade. They just sink deeper until language can't reach them. All I know is that when the world came back into focus, the light outside the door seemed too bright. My legs felt weak. My breath wouldn't steady. I stumbled toward the open air, toward the sun, as if only light could save me. The yard looked the same, the hens, the fence, the quiet fields. But nothing inside me was the same anymore. I remember gripping the bucket, though I don't know why. It felt like holding on to something normal, something real, when everything else had collapsed. My hands were trembling so badly that water spilled over the edge, darkening the dust near my feet. The sound of it hitting the ground was strangely loud, as if the world wanted to remind me I was still there, still alive. I don't remember how I reached the path back to the college. My legs moved without direction. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. Every step felt unreal. The sunlight too sharp, the voices of distant farmers too far away. I kept walking, though I didn't know where I was going. Inside my chest, something kept repeating, "What just happened? What did I do wrong?" But another voice, quieter, truer, whispered that I hadn't done anything wrong at all. Still, I couldn't listen. Shame is strange that way. It grows where blame should never exist. By the time the college walls came into view, my throat was burning. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I sat under a tree near the back gate, my hands still shaking, my eyes dry. The bucket sat beside me, still half full. I watched the water ripple in the wind, reflecting the sky like a broken mirror. Everything felt distant. The laughter of students nearby, the clanging of a bell, the scent of chalk from an open window. It was as if the world had gone on living while I had been left somewhere between moments lost. I thought about telling someone. My teacher, maybe, or a friend. But when I tried to imagine the words, they wouldn't come. My tongue felt heavy, my throat closed. The fear wasn't just of disbelief. It was of being seen differently, of being marked forever by something I hadn't chosen. So I said nothing. That evening, I walked home as if in a dream. My mother called from the kitchen, asking how my day had been. I told her it was fine. I even smiled, because that's what we do when words can't carry the truth. But inside, the silence had already begun to grow, wide and endless. It lived behind my ribs, between breaths, in the spaces between thoughts. I went to bed early that night, staring at the ceiling until the light faded. Every sound, the crickets outside, the rustle of wind through the window, seemed too loud, too close. I tried to pray, but the words broke before they could form, and when sleep finally came, it wasn't peace, it was a heavy, dreamless void. In the morning, the sun rose like it always did. The fields glowed gold again, and life continued as though nothing had changed. But I knew better, because something inside me had shattered. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. A part of me I hadn't even known existed was gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. That day, something inside me broke, something I didn't know how to fix. The days that followed passed like ghosts, quiet, colorless, and heavy. I went to college because I had to, not because I wanted to. My body moved through the same routines, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, trapped in that dim farmhouse room where light refused to enter. Each morning I would walk the long way to class, avoiding the path that led past the farmhouse. Even the thought of that place made my throat tighten. I could still hear the creak of the pump handle, the sound of his voice, the echo of that door closing behind me. The memories weren't sharp anymore, they were blurry, like smoke, but they hung around me all the same. At college, people began to notice. My friends asked if I was sick. I told them I was just tired. The teacher once asked if everything was all right at home. I nodded quickly, avoiding his eyes. The truth felt too big, too strange to say out loud. I didn't know how to name it, and I wasn't sure anyone would believe me if I did. Some days I would sit at my desk, staring at my notes without reading a word. The sounds around me, chalk against the board, pages turning, pens tapping, felt distant, like they belonged to another world. I envied my classmates for their laughter, their easy chatter, their small, ordinary problems. They didn't know how lucky they were to carry lightness in their hearts. At home, I became quieter too. My mother would ask if I'd eaten, and I would nod. My siblings played outside, their laughter spilling through the courtyard, but it didn't reach me. At night, I would lie awake, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift with the flickering lamp. Sleep wouldn't come easily. When it did, it came in fragments, sudden awakenings, shallow breaths, and the echo of a voice I wanted to forget. There were moments when guilt would creep in, soft but relentless. Maybe I shouldn't have gone inside. Maybe I should have seen it coming. These thoughts burrowed deep, feeding on the silence I had wrapped myself in. The world had always taught me to be respectful, obedient, trusting, but now those same virtues felt like traps. Sometimes I'd walk down to the river after class. The water there was calm, the current slow, like time itself had paused. I'd sit on the bank, throwing pebbles and watching the ripples fade. The quiet helped, but only a little. There were questions that wouldn't stop repeating in my mind. Why me? Did I do something wrong? Was I too trusting? Too naive? One afternoon, as I sat alone near the back of the classroom lost in thought, I felt a hand rest gently on my shoulder. It was Miss Farah, one of our younger teachers. She had always been kind in small, unnoticed ways, an extra mark for effort, a smile when everyone else seemed stern. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "Are you okay?" Her voice carried no judgment, only concern. I wanted to say yes, to smile and brush it off, but my throat refused to cooperate. I just nodded weakly. She studied my face for a moment, then said, "Sometimes silence doesn't mean peace. If there's something weighing on you, it helps to let it out, even a little." Those words lingered long after she walked away. Let it out, but how? Words felt impossible, too fragile for something so heavy. And yet something in her tone, gentle, patient, stirred a small part of me that still believed in kindness. That evening, after dinner, I sat by the window with an old notebook and a half-used pen. The pages were blank, yellowed at the corners. I stared at them for a long time, unsure where to begin. But then, without really deciding to, I started writing. The first few lines were simple, fragments of thoughts, scattered and uncertain. I didn't write about what happened, at least not directly. Instead, I wrote about how it felt. The sound of the door, the smell of dust, the silence afterward. I wrote about fear that didn't have a shape and sadness that didn't have a name. Words began to pour out faster than I expected. Each sentence felt like a small release, a whisper that carried some of the weight away. It wasn't enough to heal me, but it was enough to help me breathe. Over the next few days, writing became my quiet ritual. After everyone went to bed, I would sit under the dim lamp and fill page after page with thoughts I couldn't say aloud. Some entries were angry, others numb, and a few hopeful. Tiny sparks that surprised me. The more I wrote, the more I began to understand that I wasn't weak for what happened. I was hurt, yes, but not broken beyond repair. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice began to stir. A voice that said, "You survived. You're still here." I didn't tell anyone about the notebook. It was my secret place, my refuge. The pages held everything I couldn't trust the world with. And though I didn't speak aloud yet, something inside me had started to move again. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I didn't speak aloud yet, but my pen did. The morning I decided to speak was quiet and golden, the kind of morning where sunlight feels gentle, not harsh. I remember sitting at my desk staring at the notebook that had become my secret friend. Its pages were full now, thick with the weight of what I'd never said aloud. Every word I had written felt like a heartbeat, a proof that I was still alive. But silence, I realized, could only carry me so far. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow knowing that built up over days. The more I wrote, the more I understood that healing wasn't meant to be done alone. There was courage in honesty, even if it trembled. So that day I stayed behind after class. My heart pounded hard enough that I could feel it in my fingertips. Miss Farah was sorting through papers, humming softly. When I stepped forward, she looked up and smiled the same kind smile that had stayed with me for weeks. "Can I talk to you?" I asked, my voice small and steady. "Of course," she said, setting her papers aside. "Take your time." The words were slow to come. I twisted my hands together, staring at the floor. Something happened. A few weeks ago, my throat tightened. The air felt heavy again, like that day in the farmhouse. Someone hurt me, and I didn't know how to tell anyone. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask for details right away. She just listened, really listened. Her eyes soft, steady, full of care. That was what broke me open. I told her what I could, haltingly, through tears and silence. It wasn't everything, not yet, but it was enough. When I finally stopped, she took a slow breath and said gently, "What happened to you was not your fault." Those words landed like sunlight after a storm. I'd never heard them spoken out loud. Not once. She asked if she could help me speak to someone, a counselor maybe, or someone who could make things safer. I nodded. I was scared, but for the first time the fear didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a shadow that could be faced. The days that followed were strange, but lighter somehow. I talked to a counselor Miss Farah introduced me to, an older woman named Nadia, whose voice was calm like flowing water. With her, I didn't have to pretend. I could speak in half sentences, metaphors, tears, and she understood all of it. She told me healing wasn't about forgetting. "It's about reclaiming what's still yours," she said once. "Your laughter, your voice, your peace, they still belong to you." I started walking by the river again, this time not to escape, but to breathe. The water no longer looked still and lifeless. It shimmered in the sunlight, carrying away fallen leaves and dust. Watching it move, I thought of how time keeps flowing even when you think it can't. Some days I still wrote in my notebook. But now my words were different. They weren't only about pain anymore. They were about hope, tiny moments of it that appeared in unexpected places. Like the way the morning light fell on my window, or how my younger sister hugged me without needing a reason. I began studying with focus again. Books once a blur started to feel like friends. The world didn't seem as dark as it used to. I even helped a classmate who was struggling with her own troubles. Small ones compared to mine, maybe, but still heavy for her. She thanked me, and I realized something profound. I understood pain deeply now, but I also understood how to help ease it in others. That realization changed me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. I found joy in small rituals, brewing tea in the evening, tending to a small garden behind our house, volunteering at a nearby community center. Each act felt like stitching together a part of myself that had once been torn. Sometimes I would still wake up from a bad dream, my heart racing. But instead of crying, I'd open my notebook and write until the words steadied me. I started adding drawings, of rain washing dust off the leaves, of a sunrise climbing over dark hills, of hands reaching for light. Healing didn't mean never hurting again. It meant knowing I had the strength to face it when it came. One afternoon, after months of quiet work, I stood by the river again, the same spot where I'd once thrown stones in silence. The sun was setting and the light turned everything gold. I thought about that day and the one that had changed everything, and for the first time I didn't feel just pain. I felt power. That day had taken something from me, yes, something I could never get back. But it had also awakened something fierce and beautiful inside me, the will to rise again. I whispered it aloud, my voice steady against the wind. "I'm still here." And as the river glimmered beneath the fading sun, I finally believed it. It had been 3 years. 3 long, quiet years since that day that had once divided my life into before and after. If you saw me now, You might not recognize me from the person I used to be. My eyes no longer dart away when someone speaks to me. My shoulders no longer carry the weight of invisible shame. There's calm in my steps, purpose in my days, and a strange, gentle peace that I never thought I'd find again. I graduated from college, found a job teaching at a small school nearby, and moved into a modest home with a view of the fields. On some mornings, when the light falls through my window just right, I can almost smell the old classroom chalk dust and hear the distant bell, ringing, the same one that used to mark the end of my lectures, and the beginning of my thoughts. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. Healing wasn't sudden. It came in layers. Slow forgiveness, acceptance, and learning to speak without trembling. It came in the way I chose to keep going, even on the days when remembering hurt too much. And it came in the faces of the young students who now call me sir, looking at me with the same trust I once placed in others. Maybe that's why, one morning, I felt the quiet urge to walk that same old path again, the dusty road that led from the college to the farmhouse. For a long time, I'd avoided it. I had taken longer routes, busier streets, anything to keep from passing the place that had changed everything. But now, with the years behind me, something inside whispered, "Go back." The air was warm, the sky bright with clouds drifting lazily above. Every step I took was steady. The path hadn't changed much. The same clusters of wildflowers by the ditch, the same creaking gate halfway down the road. And yet everything felt different. Because I was different, when I reached the farmhouse, I stopped. The building stood quietly behind its weathered fence, smaller than I remembered. The guard was gone. I had heard he'd moved away long ago. There was no echo of that terrible day anymore, only birdsong and the faint hum of the wind moving through the fields. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching the sunlight rest on the old walls. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I took out a folded letter from my pocket. It wasn't for him. It was for me. I'd written it the night before. A letter to the version of myself who had walked out of that place trembling, broken and silent. I unfolded it slowly and began to read in a quiet voice. You did nothing wrong. You were kind. You trusted. And though that trust was betrayed, it does not define you. What happened was cruel, but you are not its shadow. You are its survivor. You will learn to breathe again, to smile again, to live again. And one day you'll return to this path not to relive your pain, but to reclaim your strength. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were wet, but not from sorrow. The tears were softer now, the kind that come from release, not anguish. I folded the letter once more and placed it beneath a stone near the gate. Not to bury the past, but to honor it and to say this happened. And I still rose. As I walked back toward the village, the breeze carried a familiar scent, earth after sun, wheat swaying gently in rhythm with the wind. It felt like a homecoming. That evening, sitting by my window, I opened my old notebook again, the same one I had once filled with words of pain and confusion. Its pages were yellowed now, but between the lines I saw growth, how my handwriting had steadied, how my words had softened. This time I didn't write about what hurt. I wrote about what healed. I wrote about forgiveness, not for the one who hurt me, but for the version of myself who had stayed silent, thinking it was weakness. I forgave him. I told him he did the best he could with what he knew, and then I wrote something new and a promise. I will use my story to help others find their voice. I will remind them that silence does not mean defeat, and pain does not mean the end. We all carry scars, but they can become symbols of survival. Weeks later, I started a small writing circle at the community center, a safe space for anyone who had lived through something they couldn't talk about. We sat on old wooden benches sharing stories, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. And every time someone opened up, I saw a piece of myself reflected in them. Not broken, but brave. I learned that healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming the power it once stole. It's standing in the same place that once brought you to your knees and realizing you can stand taller now. That day, walking home from the community center, I passed the old road once again. The sunset spread gold across the fields and the world looked endless. I stopped, breathed deeply, and smiled. Not the forced kind, but the real one that starts from within. I whispered into the fading light. Sometimes, the places that once broke us become the same places where we learn to stand again. And as the last line of sun disappeared behind the hills, I thought back to that young man I once was, the 25-year-old student with dust on his shoes and innocence in his heart. I was 25 then, I said softly, and that day changed everything. But today, I am more than what happened to me. The wind carried my words away, and for the first time I felt completely free.